Welcome to the Synergetic Culture Podcast. I'm your host, Adam Bieber, and our mission is simple: to help young professionals maximize their influence and impact. Let's jump into today's episode. Welcome back to part 2 of this engaging culture conversation with Ben Ortlip. Thank you for tuning in today. Ben, it's good to have you back, and I'm glad to continue the conversation.
Thanks for having me, Adam.
Yeah, man, let's just jump right in. So we set the foundation
We talked a lot last time.
We did. We sure did. Setting the foundation for the era that we're in today of significance, of emotional connection, of being able to connect to something greater than ourselves when it comes to what we do for work. And so as we pivot into talking about culture and the work that you've done for the last 10 to 15 years, specifically in this space, would you mind just kind of summarizing, especially if somebody, wasn't able to listen to the entire episode and they're tuning in, they're like, I just want to hear the announcement. And they went to the second episode.
So
summarize this for us.
Sort of two main points. One is recognize that something dramatic has shifted. And a lot of people don't really think about it that way. They think of, okay, it's another day at the office. But when you understand how dramatically something has shifted, and I'm talking about shifting in terms of what, a 50-year period of change that transitioned probably around 2000. And we have so much sort of carryover the way business has always been done that people are still trying to use what worked in the 1990s, that it just isn't working as much anymore. We're figuring it out, but if you would stop and go, hey, wait a minute, something's different, if you would do that first, it would really accelerate your effectiveness as a leader. So when we talk about what has shifted, this is the second thing to sort of take away from our previous conversation, is that, okay, we're actually talking about 150 years of industrial history here. And so we had sort of what we call the survival, era of business and we're talking about the workforce sort of being in survival mode. And then after about 50 years, it transitioned to what we call the success era. And then another 50 years goes by. And for the last, 20 years now or so, we've been in this sort of significance era where people are looking for purpose in what they do. All right, so that's the second thing to understand. And then if we just drill down a little bit deeper into that second thing, we're saying that depending on where the workforce is, what's made companies successful is how they've adapted what we call the social contract that they have with their employees. And so when people are in survival era, a sort of authoritarian mentality or approach worked. The strategy or the social contract was authority, and it says, just tell us what to do and we'll do it.
Yep. Then
we said when the transition to success happened, that authoritarian operating system or social contract gave way to more of an influence-based operating system or social contract where we're not just going to tell you what to do, we're going to start to develop you as co-decision makers in the process. This is when we shifted from something called management to something called leadership.
Yeah.
And you can go back to bookstores and publishing to see this transition in real life. All the books used to be about management. You can't find a management book in the bookstore anymore. All the books are on leadership. And then about 20 years ago, we started to experience a transition to, sort of what we call culture. So management, leadership, culture corresponds with survival, success, significance. And then the social contract has also evolved. We went from authority to
influence and collaboration.
Thank you. And now we're the social contract that works today for those who have self-actualized is something that we call autonomy, where you're creating pockets of freedom and autonomy and you're releasing people into their self-actualization. That's where the best work is happening. And we still have people at all levels, so you have to kind of understand what your people need in each of those.
Yeah.
So this is all very that's the sort of, theoretical part of the conversation. It gets super practical here in a minute.
Yeah. Yeah. No, it does, because what you chose to do was, as this evolution took place and you saw it, you decided we've got to do something about it, because now we have history to look back at and see this growth and this evolution, and it aligns with that hierarchy that you're talking about, the growth trajectory. So being that we have it and we have definitions and we have language to talk about, what do we do about it? And so let's kind of talk about the history of your work in this space and what it looked like. And please feel free to throw out some of the logos that you've been able to help. You already mentioned Chick-fil-A in the first episode. I think it's powerful that you've done some work with them, because I think one of the first things I think of when I hear Chick-fil-A, whether it's the support center and my friends that work at corporate, or even my brother-in-law who's an operator in Texas, I think of positive culture. I think of excellent work environment.
You've done a great job.
Yeah.
So the way I got into this I started out as a writer, and writing was a passport into all kinds of, I used to work in an ad agency, and I was writing commercials and doing branding work and everything else, which is why I knew anything about a camera and could volunteer for the project that we met on.
Which is funny you say that, because I thought to myself later, like,
what was he doing?
Yeah, like, why did he have this super slick over the shoulder camera that he was working at this golf tournament when he's the culture guy?
So, well, what happened was, when I sort of stepped out of advertising and went out on my own as a writer, that was almost like a passport into all kinds of different worlds.
Sure.
And so I got invited to do a lot of corporate communications. I was sort of the idea guy behind these big events that would go on. And back in the 90s, man, companies were spending fortune on these, corporate events and the corporate videos that were used internal audiences and all this. So by no design of my own, I just sort of started seeing how organizations and experiencing all these different companies and what they do to try to keep the vibe going and stuff. And then I started getting invited to collaborate with some of the famous thought leaders.
Yeah.
And I was a ghostwriter for a lot of the people whose books, sit on the bookshelves now about leadership and management. I remember management, one of the big names is Peter Drucker. Mm-hmm. And the Drucker Institute hired me to write these and produce these massive volumes of, video-based training. And so I had to kind of understand what management was. I majored in English and business in college, so it wasn't my first toe in the water on that. But man, I sort of came away with a street MBA on management based on working with the Drucker Institute.
Have you? I'm sorry to interrupt. Have you seen the show The Office?
Oh, yeah.
So, like, when you say management and you're like, there aren't even any books on management. I'm like, well, Michael Scott wrote one called Somehow I Manage.
Yeah, right.
Over 1 billion copies sold, more than the Bible, he says in his little statement.
Yeah.
But that's what it makes me think of, just the humor.
I love these shows that capture what it's like. And really, they're just sort of playing back.
Yeah.
And what's interesting about shows like that, it started with kind of Dilbert and just the commentary on what it's like to work now. Mm-hmm. They do such a great job of pointing out what's wrong with the workplace, and having some fun with that.
Yeah.
But so I worked with those, and then I got hired to ghostwrite for people that were experts on leadership. And so I'm sort of, coming into this going, hey, what's this all about? We did this whole thing on management. I was even asking, like, what's the difference between management and leadership?
Wow.
Because they sort of dovetail with each other. And so I had to think about that. And then here's the thing, about 15 years ago, I was like, why is everybody using the word culture? I looked it up. Culture was like Merriam-Webster's word of the year in like 2012.
Wow.
And I was like, wow, that's interesting.
Yeah.
So is culture the byproduct of leadership or maybe management or both? So I was like, as a writer who's supposed to be supporting, these different thought leaders whose names you've heard, I was like, what's going on? How can I write about this with them and support, champion their ideas unless I understand this? So one day I got asked to write a book about culture with one of these guys. And so I was like, yeah, man, I've been wanting to know what culture is, so this is going to be great. I learned what management was from the Drucker Institute, the best place in the world to learn what management is. And then I learned about leadership from all these other people. And now I'd love to work on this book about culture. But it didn't go very well because as we started to work on it, the author would sort of talk about what they thought the book was going to be about. And I was like, okay, but that's a leadership principle, and that's a management principle. How is this a book about culture? And they were like, you're right. And so we went back and forth for about a year, and I finally just said, I think you're the person to write about this because you definitely know how to create culture. But I don't think you figured out how everything sorts yet.
Yeah.
And they were like, you're right. I'm going to keep working on this. And that was like 15 years ago. But I remember coming away from that and going, I don't think anybody's figured this out yet.
Yeah.
There's this transition, the progression. And leaders are out there just sort of doing some management stuff and some leadership stuff. Somebody has to figure out the relationship with all of that with culture. And I was getting invited to work with big companies too, from a sort of, advisory role, strategic stuff, solving people problems and all that.
What you would later understand is culture.
And, well, one of them, a very well-known restaurant, called up and just said, man, we need help with culture. And so, and that was just serendipitous because I went in there and I was like, all right, we're going to do a causality study on what contributes to the culture. And that's when, during that study, is when it all sort of clicked for me. It was like, okay, there's some management issues, there's some leadership issues, and then there's some issues that have to do with this thing called autonomy, with self-actualization, if you will, the search for significance in the workforce.
Yep.
And then I was like, oh, okay, so some of this lives here, some of it lives here, and the rest of it lives here. And that's when I started to see that it follows with Maslow's hierarchy of needs, then I was like, okay, I think we can sort this. And the difference that I made for that first company was unbelievable. They basically doubled this is $1 billion company. They doubled their revenue over the course of about 2 years.
Wow.
As we just simply said, okay, here's what the culture is asking for, and here's how we deliver that to them, just using slight modifications to the principles of management and leadership.
Wow. And so that set the foundation for...
I was like, okay, now we have a framework.
Yep.
And so we'd go into other big organizations. I remember I was out at I think I could say the name, but I was out at Caterpillar.
Yeah.
And I remember drawing the framework. In the early stages, I started drawing the framework on a whiteboard, and the host of the meeting goes, stop. And I was like, okay. And he goes, I'll be right back. And he goes down the hall, and he comes back a couple minutes later, and there's like 5 other guys in suits. And they sort of line the wall of the conference room, and he goes, start over. And it was because, this was like we had discovered this sort of lens that just all of a sudden just opened the thinking and the eye. And it sort
the perspective,
it brought clarity to, oh, that's what's been going on, and this is what you do with it. And it's not like a whole brand new set of weird, gymnastics that nobody's ever seen before. It's just understanding a better construct to accommodate the changes and the latest developments that are happening.
Well, thank you so much for listening. Thanks for tuning in here. I want to thank our sponsors, the O Agency and Wingman Payments, for supporting this podcast and believing in what we're doing here. Was there a moment for you where you realized, okay, this was successful in the restaurant chain, but would this transfer to a
It
construction
didn't matter
company.
because an organization is an organization.
Yeah.
You
Yeah.
know, it has frontline delivery people. There's a product or a service that you're offering, and as the organization grows, there's sort of this infrastructure that enables scale to happen. And really what we're talking about is organizational effectiveness.
Yeah.
So it didn't matter what industry it was in. And yes, I ended up doing the same thing in healthcare, manufacturing, transportation, you know, all these telecommunications, all these different places. It's the same thing.
Yeah.
You know, this is why a CEO in one industry can be hired and valuable and effective in a completely different industry, because their expertise is how do you run an organization?
Yep.
How do you make an organization effective?
Yep.
So,
And how do you quantify and measure an organization's culture can be replicated as well across industries.
and that's what we realized is, you know, can we codify this so that it works in an organization? Every organization might have a different set of core values, and they might have a different sort of, I don't know, ethos.
Yeah.
But we can codify and quantify the components that make up culture in an organization, and then you just change out, you know, the core raw materials of each of those. And so that was something that this approach ended up being, which, again, I didn't really plan in my career to do this at all, but it was just sort of fascinating how, you know, I was sort of hurled into this world. And as a writer, I was well suited to sort of understand and describe what was going on.
Well, and just the ability to communicate it in a way that would make sense. So that when you brought in those executives to line the boardroom, the light bulb comes on because of the way you can
it's like
construct
Steve
this
Martin
content.
once said, you know, some people have a way with words and other people not have way. You know,
So I think I've told this to you off camera at coffees or things like that over the last year. It's been a minute since I've said it on the podcast, but my inclination into leadership goes back to my high school job serving at the organization that we were serving at together, where there were things like John Maxwell books and a lot of the training that I got from my mom, actually, who we were just talking about a minute ago before we hit record. That was her style, was let me empower this team. Let me collaborate with them. Let me show them that even though they're young, they have influence and impact.
Yeah.
And that evolved into, you know, an early sales job that I had with Tim Elmore at Growing Leaders. And I'll never forget it. As I was leaving the organization to take a next step, a guy who's still there writes and speaks with Tim. His name's Andrew McPeak. He sat me down and he said, Adam, you're one of the best I've ever been around at naturally building the culture around you. And it was the first time that like any collection of words like that had ever been said to me. And I was humbled. I really didn't know how to respond to it. But he thankfully came with not just a compliment, but a challenge. He said, well, I don't think you know exactly how it is you do what you do.
Yeah.
He said, but I think if you could figure that out, you could quantify it, you could measure it, you could teach it, and you could help other organizations achieve that.
That's right.
And so for the last 6 years of the existence of the Synergetic Culture company, before the podcast even started, it was me sitting there writing, trying to figure this out. And so it's just so cool that like this serendipitous event continues to happen in your life and now my life, where you've had a few extra years on this train and now have, as we come together, we're pulling the pieces together of what that actual tangibly looks like.
Yeah.
And so at some point you transitioned from, which I know when it is, it's kind of going into COVID. It was, how do we scale what we're doing here so that we can help more companies? And that's where the MRI comes into play. So can you just kind of explain a little bit about what the Culture MRI is?
Yep.
At the beginning of the first episode, I said you're the founder and creator of the Culture MRI, but what is that?
Yeah, so basically, you know, going back to the companies that I would work with, and I would try out these different things, and they responded with just tremendous enthusiasm, and it was just having a massive impact. You know, I was like, okay, well, this is our framework. This is what we do with every organization. We go in, We find out what's going on, and then we look at these sort of 15 factors. And when we understand, is it in a good place? Are they meeting the needs? Back to Maslow's hierarchy, there's sort of these different needs. And if you look in these sort of 15 components across the hierarchy, people's needs are either being met or they're not. And it's real practical stuff. It's like, are you creating a workplace where people can show up and work and it actually functions? That's you either have the job designed well, or you've got it designed poorly, or you've got the organization and the systems designed well. So that's one of 15 things. Another thing is, are you matching people with their personality and their work style with the kind of job that it needs? And I could give you examples of what that looks like. Of course, everybody hears that and they probably think of their own. Is compensation where it should be, or is it not competitive? And then you sort of get up into the success era and the sort of psychosocial needs that people have. I want recognition, I want esteem, I want advancement, I want a way to move forward in my career. I need to know that there's a sort of a clout factor. Vision is another one that's in this, like, do I understand why we're doing what we're doing? Start with why and all that. That's just a leadership tenet, And then when you get into the pure self-actualization, those people's needs revolve around how do you autonomize, or how do you self-actualize in the workplace? And the three motivators there are craft, cause, and community. Like some people are motivated to master a craft, to be good at something. Some are motivated by the desire to belong to something, to be part of a community. And some want a cause, some want to matter in the world and for their work to matter. Well, that's only the self-actualizing people are even thinking about that. But so you have all these, what we call psychometrics, and it's sort of like, it's all psychology stuff is where most of the difference lives. So if you're creating a culture, it's more about understanding the psychological motivators. That's where the hierarchy, in our framework, the MRI stands for Motivational Response Index.
Love it.
And so, after all of that, experiencing that in different companies and pattern recognition and all that, we came away and we said, here's the 15 things, 7 at the bottom, 5 in the middle, and 3 at the top. And when we assess for what's going on in each of these, we can pinpoint exactly what the organization should do to get the biggest bang for their buck. And I'll talk a little bit about what that can look like, but essentially the psychological needs of the people that work in an organization can be quantified and codified, and we even can put a dollar value on it.
It's amazing. It's amazing because to me, this is the first time that we've actually had a resource that can help with that. A lot of times people think culture is the soft skills. It's how you feel about what you do. It's this figurative idea, and it's more of a feeling than anything. We need data. We need to be able to quantify and measure, because that's how you improve. That's how you understand where the target on the wall is. Yeah. If it's just this figurative idea, then there really is nothing that you're aiming toward versus having an actual way to, borrowing from the medical term MRI, to be able to zero in on where the actual pinpointed issues are.
Yeah.
And so, how does it work? Let's kind of get into a little bit of the tactics here. How do you do this? Like, what is the process?
It's so
look
simple.
like?
And we really build on the concept of engagement survey, in a way. So I wouldn't be, as pejorative to say that we've, been doing this poorly or it can't be done. It's actually been done since 1990. I mean, Gallup started their Q12 engagement survey back in 1990 because the sense that something was wrong. It was a great first shot at this, and they did a great job of saying, here's the 12 things that matter in an organization, which was a great first step. Where we've evolved, though, is, like one of my favorite questions to pick on in the early thinking was, do you have a best friend at work? And that's so important to know, because that's obviously one of the biggest factors. But what are you supposed to do with that if you're a leader? Are you supposed to get everybody together and say, Adam, here's your friend Noah, and y'all are going to be best friends at work? And so, obviously you can't engineer that kind of stuff. But if you look at it from a psychometrics perspective, there are so many business disciplines that you can leverage to make changes to the little, to each area. So, our framework, Motivational Response Index, basically looks at those things and
via engagement survey. So like a company would administer the engagement survey to all of their employees.
So we start out with whatever engagement survey you're using, upgrade to this one, because this is going to map everything that we find. It's, all this, a lot of the similar things is like, do you like this? Do you like that? But we're going to map the responses to what we call remediations, the action steps that you can take. And then we're also going to stack rank those so that there's not a lot of return on investment for these down here. And so all of a sudden, all the ping pong tables and, bring your pet to work on all that, that lives in a space, and you can understand whether that's going to help or not.
Yep.
Because chances are you're going to have more tactical things like, hey, we need to look at your compensation model because it's not as competitive as the guy across the street.
Sure.
And that's where you're,
Sure.
So we're going to understand exactly, or you're not developing people and your people are just, leaving or dying on the inside because they feel like, gosh, I just really want to. It's so easy to fix stuff like that. It doesn't cost a lot of money. But if you're not aware that that's the pressing need of your people, then you'll just skip right over it and go to some, what we see a lot of times is culture based on whatever book just came out, whatever leadership book is popular or whatever seminar you happen to come across.
Yep.
So this is a real quantified and codified approach that ranks your unique situation with the remediation steps that are going to give you the biggest return on investment.
My favorite example that we've talked about, because it's so practical and it's also not as emotionally driven, is when you have systems and processes in place that cause people to have to replicate work.
Yeah.
Like that's a data integrity issue, because it's like, is it right on this platform or right on this platform?
It can
and
be.
I have to manually put it in that platform and put it into that platform. Then what happens if I fat finger and accidentally put the wrong email out? And so those types of frustrations compound.
Right.
And when you're talking about an entire workforce that's dealing with the same issue, maybe it's one department or one subset of an organization, there could be a ton of frustration that just lives in, it is just a pain to do my job. I have to replicate the same thing over and over. And those are also very simple, pinpointed things that can be addressed.
And they're not going to tell you about them necessarily because nobody wants to be the squeaky wheel. In fact, the more that a company talks about having culture and being the more pressure people feel to be upbeat. And not to, the last thing I want to do is be like, oh man, this is really bothering me. It's like, you're just not positive enough. We're trying to create a positive culture. No, actually, I'm pointing to a need that I have that would help me to reach positivity.
Improve the culture and reach positivity.
And it's dumb, practical stuff. You mentioned technology that doesn't talk to each other. We have this term called single sign-on, and a lot of what, companies in the technology transformation, digital transformation requires just stacks, their tech stack being looked at. But it also is super practical stuff like, the loading dock is on one side of the building, but all of the storage units are on the other end of the building. And so I don't mind taking stuff out of the truck and putting it into storage, but it's a real sort of self-defeating reality that I'm doing this in the most inefficient process. Whereas if we would think about, again, that's a management issue, not a leadership issue, but it can be a variety of different things. All of that what we just described, lives in the category of organizational efficiency, which is, it has a place in the MRI.
And what I don't think people realize is solving these sometimes tactical issues can increase engagement at work.
Oh, it's
increase
massive.
employee retention.
Yeah.
Create better performance. And so then all of a sudden, all of these other measurable things that you already are looking at and tracking with a fine-tooth comb start to improve because that person's psychology and feeling toward what they do improves based on the changes that are made tactically.
And we go a step further and we say we're able to, because of a whole bunch of white papers that we found that have been around for years, we're able to put a dollar value based on some simple just data points about the economics of your company.
Sure.
We can put an actual dollar value on each of those things. And so, knowing exactly, it's just like it with an MRI. We could cut you open and just start to poke around and see if there's something that we notice. Or we could do an MRI ahead of time, pinpoint exactly whether or not there's anything wrong.
Yep.
And specifically what kind of modalities are going to make you feel better.
Yep.
So it's just an advancement in technology. I'll give you an example. A couple of years ago, we had an organization, and they came to us and they were like, hey, we've really been having problems with turnover, and we figured out, we think that, this is the company talking, we think it's because, people are stealing our competitors are stealing our employees. So we need to, raise pay across the board. This is what they did before they came to us. So they jacked like 15% across the board pay raises for everybody. It was millions of dollars.
Yeah. Oh, yeah.
And then we did the Culture MRI, and we were like, compensation is one of the things we measure, and it was not a problem. It was not an issue. But we had this just blinking light on the dashboard over here in another area. And we said, here's your problem. Here's why people are leaving. And we could have fixed that for a fraction. We could have helped you see how to fix that for a fraction of what you just spent to reset the expectation of what pay will be in this company. And so that's why it's so important before you start cutting people open and, doing physical damage.
Yeah.
It's like take a picture of what, and scan and find out what's wrong. And so turns out that they had, in their case, I think it was digital transformation. Like there was some key pieces of technology that didn't talk to each other. It created a lot of redundant work.
Yep.
And the reason that's important is not only do people feel defeated because they're not working in an operational, efficient manner, but they had to come in on Saturday. They had to work longer. It was more stressful.
Yep. Yep.
So there was a snowball effect.
Sure.
Their solution, good leaders meant well, was to say, hey, let's throw some more money at people. Didn't make a single bit of difference in the turnover and everything else. So that's why you just got to know going in. But that's an example of how.
It's funny you mentioned that because during a transition, I had a leader tell me, man, if I could just throw more money at you and that would solve the problem, I would do it. But it sounds like that's not going to solve the problem. And so there's a realization that took place of like, there's more to the story here, and this was probably the best move.
Sometimes it's quality of work. Sometimes it's quality of life, too. So there's all kinds of ways that, things that you do. We call these the remediations.
Yep.
And what we do with companies and what we do to support the work of consultants like yourself is, we're kind of like the radiology team in the background. You're the physician. And so, we sort of go, hey, here's what's going on. And then you as the expert, you go, oh, I know what they need, And so, we're not giving everybody that comes in chemotherapy, It's
Sure.
We find out what's going on so that you can practice medicine with the organization, help them get more healthy and effective and go from toxic to thriving.
What I love about the way the MRI is set up is after the employee engagement survey, all of that data feeds into a dashboard. So there's now a SaaS platform that a senior leadership team, that an HR leader, someone that is going to help move the needle literally in this space can see those needles, can see the different graphs and the different gauges that are measuring the different areas. so that it helps to zero in. This is probably a good place for me to kind of pivot and make this announcement that I've been itching to make.
Yeah.
And so what we've been developing at the Synergetic Culture is what we're calling the Culture by Design framework. We say it all the time, culture is built by design or by default. And so within the Culture by Design framework, we want to help you assess, diagnose, prescribe, and transform your culture. And I'm super excited to announce for the first time publicly that the Culture MRI is powering the Culture by Design framework. So by partnering with the Synergetic Culture Company to go through this idea of the Culture by Design framework, it is so much more than an idea. It is truly a framework that has an incredible backbone in this team with Ben's organization and with their platform to help us quantify and measure culture effectively and then inspire and motivate change to happen and take place. Super excited. I just want to take the opportunity to thank you for believing in me as a consultant and my organization and kind of what we're trying to build here within the Culture by Design framework and certification, but also just the work that you've done to set the foundation for this to take place. It is serendipitous. It's exciting for me, 20 years in the making for us.
That's right.
And so as people work with the Synergetic Culture Company, they're going to get to engage you within the Culture MRI. Right. It fires me up, man. I'm excited. There's a transformation that I think we're going to be able to see, not just for super large companies. You've thrown out some big names, but this really could affect change in the enterprise space, also in the nonprofit space, in the education space, in all these amazing areas where people are motivated by so much more than just money or survival. They want that self-actualization. They want that culture. And I think we can do something about transforming it and do it at an amazing level.
Well, we're excited to partner with you. This is definitely a system that's been proven, multiple industry sectors, multiple size, the size of the company. We're excited about what you do. Again, we're a diagnostics group. That's our lane, is we can tell you exactly what's going on. But we're not the best at the implementations. That's just not the area where we've decided to focus. Our super skill, our superpower is, figuring out exactly what's wrong and what to do, where to invest in order to get to the next level. Most companies are operating at about 50% of their capacity. In other words, when you invest in, let's say $100 million in salaries, you're really only getting about $50 million return on that investment. And we, think that we can show you ways to say, hey, if you'll make these few changes right here, you'll actually recoup. We'll bump you up to 60 or even 70 or 75 or more, your return on investment for your labor costs. And that's where your skill set comes in, and your superpower is those implementations and executing those things, showing people, first of all, here's what you need to do. And so you're the implementer, and we're the diagnosticians. And, you should never be paying for employees. You should always be investing in employees so that they can produce a return. They should be paying you, so to speak. So we're excited about the partnership.
Man, I'm pumped.
And look forward to, anybody watching. We hope you see this aspirationally, that there's untapped potential in your organization. And if you want to find out what that looks like, reach out to Adam and start a conversation about how to discover the untapped potential. And for you as a leader, there's untapped potential in your leadership too. And there's even things to do in our diagnostics that are low or no cost, that steps you can take to start to understand what this means for you personally in terms of your own career and everything else.
Absolutely. I acknowledge that there's going to be a varied response just to this announcement and to where we might find someone on their journey. And so this is where your book is such a great resource, because Culture's the New Leadership really does help. Why don't you explain the whole purpose? Like, I started to read this and then reached back out to you after 19 years or so, because it was hitting home. It was making sense to me and helping to solve the problem that I've been looking to solve. And so talk about this just for a minute as a resource for somebody who's like, I'm going to ease into this conversation.
Right. And this is the thing. I mean, this is so hard to talk about, because we're talking about a massive shift. That's the first thing that we want people to understand. And so as we've been talking on these episodes together, there's probably little moments when you go, yeah, that's right. And you can tell that there's insights that are happening here. But what I'm so pleased with to have a thing like a book to come behind is because it does a better job than our conversation can about laying out systematically, what everything is, in terms of the context and what's going on, but also then transitioning into the practical aspects of here's what you do in order to advance yourself, to advance your organization, right down to, how to employ the principles in that. So, let's talk. Yeah.
That's what I was going to say. Let's start a conversation.
Yeah.
There's different ways to engage. There's different ways to receive this. And so for someone that's not in a position to make a financial change to their organization, as it relates to culture and measuring and solving for it.
You're not the decision maker.
Yeah, I would still encourage reading the book, because it's going to continue to educate and give you language around what it is that you're looking for. It's going to help you notice it more as you're looking for at other opportunities, or as new opportunities present themselves to you. It'll give you indicators of where you will find healthy cultures. But for the decision maker, for the person who wants to get engaged, no, this is a year-long, at minimum, a year-long engagement of investing in the culture, measuring, remeasuring, and remeasuring again to make sure that we're making positive change. And those changes result in financial benefit. They result in increased productivity and higher retention, problems that organizations across the board are trying to solve, and we want to help with that. And so, like Ben said, you can reach out to me directly, adam@synergeticculture.com. You can go to our website. As we have now made this announcement, there's a lot more content on the website under the assessments tab, where you can start to see, okay, what is the Culture by Design framework, and how can I start to get engaged and at least just reach out for information and start this conversation. Man, I'm super pumped. Any closing thoughts for you as we wrap up?
No, we just look forward to this is a process. You can't come away from this episode and go, okay, I got it. So, join us. Let's talk. We're very accessible.
Yeah.
We see this as, we have a why behind all of this. Adam and I both enjoy our careers. So we have, what we consider great jobs. Our work meets all of the needs that we have, the needs that we have for food, shelter, and clothing, but we also have our psychological needs met. We feel fulfilled that we're doing something significant in the world. Our heart breaks for the just tens of thousands or even millions of people who wake up every day having to go to work. And there's either something about it that they're not really happy with and they can't put their finger on it, or worse, that they work in a toxic culture and they just don't know how to survive. So our passion is to help those people. And if there's anything that we can do to help spread this mindset and this discovery and this set of insights about, the world is different, and we think we've found kind of a cure to cancer, to be honest with you. We would love to advance that technology and that way of thinking to the rest of the workforce because we think we have something to share.
Well, Ben, I appreciate you. Love you. Thank you so much. God bless you. And I'm excited about this journey we are starting together. It's just another chapter. It will be fun to look back 20 years from now.
That's right.
And see what kind of impact we've been able to have.
Yeah.
And I do fully agree with everything that you just said in terms of where our heart is in this.
Yeah.
So thank you so much for listening. Thanks for tuning in. Again, Ben, thank you for being here. I want to thank our sponsors, the O Agency and Wingman Payments, for supporting this podcast and believing in what we're doing here, and excited to make this announcement. We will see you guys again soon on another episode of Synergetic Culture.